waste my life. I don't wanna waste my life. I don't wanna waste my life. Living in this world.
On the beats.
It's just some things, there's no going back. You know what I'm saying?
jwoodbeats.com.
Yeah, I'm not the one with the issues. I hear you. Now here is your tissue. If I'm moving too fast, I might have to dismiss you. And it's really too bad, cause I really will miss you. But I'm not the one with the issues. I left him at church when I made it official. I murdered the curse with my own benediction. Left God in the dirt, call it death of the fiction. Superstition will be served in eviction. Competition will be left in the ditch. Oh my God, it's too damn hot in this kitchen. The fishes of men are now swimming with fishes. Oops, my bad, I guess I'm moving too vicious. Verses sold, I gotta put them on your wish list. Bless my soul, cause I'm dodging your little hit list. I guess you know, you just lost another witness.
Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go right now. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go, I'm out of here.
I can do anything, fuck your opinions and energy. I finally got the epitome. My biggest hindrance was God can't do nothing but fail. Greater is me, I never needed your deity. All of this human capacity, when it gets rough, I can pick myself up and prevail. Cause I don't need anything other than people who fuck with me. Good business, it starts with good company. That's why your boy is obsessed with community. Cause greater is we can create opportunity. Doing what God never did, cause a God never could, but a people is all we need.
Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go, yeah. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go right now. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go.
What's up, family? Welcome to another night of Bible study with an ex-pastor with my wonderful co-host, Jason from Dragons and Genesis. I hope y'all are ready for an excellent night. We have made it like quite a long way through the book of Exodus, man. This has been beautiful, and I think we pulled up like just some amazing insight along this journey. So I'm super duper excited. It's great to see so many of you in the chat. Kyle, hey. So great to see you. Muttley is in the building, my homie. And I just saw that you got some merch today. You got some cups, man. And I got to go back to Discord to take a look at that. I was in a meeting when I saw it. So like literally you almost cost me my job today, Muttley. No, I'm just playing. You didn't. But when I saw it, I was like, holy crap, that is freaking awesome. Reese is in the building. Nice to have you in here live, man. I promise you, I think you're going to enjoy tonight. Listen, as y'all are coming in, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, and consider joining, supporting, or connecting with this community content or channel in any way that makes sense for you. And last but not least, check out our merch and our books. We have some of the dopest merch in the game, and I'm telling you, I'm going to be writing enough books where you can have a library. Just in the past few months, I wrote Christ Held Up, which is doing exceptionally well right now. It's an incredible tool if you want to have conversations with believers that you care about without feeling like you're condescending on them. This is a very helpful tool for that. But my next book, which I just finished and is available for pre-release now, is called Black Non-Believer Next Door. You can already pre-order it on Amazon, and it is an autobiographical sketch. It is somewhat of a memoir of my first 2 years after deconversion, and I'll be adding a few more volumes to that one. I was originally going to be writing that for the full 10 years that I spent my life in the closet as an atheist, and I decided like 10 years is going to be a really long book. So at 2 years, you're well over 100 pages and well over 20 chapters. So it's going to be worth the read. So I'm super excited about that. Let me see. Have I hit everything? If you have not caught the Sunday session series that we're in now, man, I'm telling you, you are robbing yourself. If you're looking for conversations that are people-centric, that are people-driven, you might want to jump in on our Sundays. We are having an amazing conversation right now about drive, where we're talking about motivation, ambition, persistence, purpose, and then just talking about what it means, or exploring what it means to kind of take control of your own life, or take the wheel, what that means and how you can do it without superstition and all of that great stuff. So real fun stuff. And of course, we do Bible study with the next pastor every Wednesday. Also, we got a first Sunday of the month coming up. So guess what? Ex-Pastor Call-In Show is this Sunday. You're not going to want to miss it. This is going to be an incredible one. And then I have big plans for the last one of the year. So stay tuned for that. All right. So I think I've pretty much hit everything that I need to hit. And I think it's time. To get this party started. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Jason on to the stage. Jason, what's up, man?
Not much. Just wrapped up another day at work.
Yes,
now
sir.
I get to come over here and hang out with you and all these wonderful people out here in the chat. Drink some mead, talk about some Bible stuff, some mythology, some altars of burnt offerings that we're about to get to. So yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And like, no lie, y'all, I think I jumped in maybe 5 minutes before start time. And then for 2 minutes, I was talking on the wrong mic. I was talking on this mic. And then I had to get my camera cut on. So this is actually our first time talking since we got started. But I think this is going to be a juicy conversation. Obviously, Exodus has been filled with a lot of surprises so far. I think it's been filled with a lot of things. Jason, you've brought a lot of insight to this conversation that I don't think much of us were expecting. And so there was so much about this book that I think gives us all fresh lenses so far. And so before we jump into chapter 27, would you like to just give us a brief synopsis of where we've been and where we're headed now? Because we've learned a lot. So if you would, just set us up for this. Set us up for what's next.
Okay. So one of the things that we learned, one of the most important things really, is that the book of Exodus was not really one story. It started off as this pretty truncated story. It was very short, and it basically began with the typical call of the prophet scene, where Moses is hanging around in Midian. This is in northwest Arabia, and he sees the burning bush, and he gets called to go into Egypt and work some miracles, and he's going to work just a handful of miracles. And then after that, 3 miracles for the elders of the Hebrew people, 1 miracle for the benefit of the Egyptians, and then they all get to take off and head out into the wilderness. There's this brief little miracle scene where he makes this little wooden idol, throws it into the water, it purifies the water, and then they get the covenant from Yahweh. The end. They're done. And then we get all this other material that gets added on, several chapters at the beginning of the story, and then a bunch, to kind of introduce this Moses character. He has this whole birth narrative scene that's ripped straight out of the movie Willow. All sorts of fun stuff. Okay, there's all these dead babies, and then which that was borrowed from the It was a common trope at the time, but part of the myth was borrowed from Sargon of Akkad, who may or may not be considered the world's first emperor. Anyway, the scene gets borrowed from there, and also some Zoroastrian sources. And then you get all these other miracles that get added in. Some of the miracles that he worked for the Hebrew elders get turned into miracles that he works against the Egyptians. And you get multiple sources for these miracles, ends up with a total of 10 of them. And then after that, they go into the wilderness, but then they want even more scenes about that. So they chop out the bit where they get the covenant near the water, and instead they have to go over to Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai to get the covenant again. And then you get this whole big thing, 10 Commandments, and then they talk about a bunch of other stuff. But then you've also got all these details about what else they need to do. Like they have to build a temple, right? Now, their temple is going to be set up the same way as any other sun god temple. It's going to be a rectangle. The opening faces east, so the light of the rising sun can shine in onto the divine throne that will sit at the back. And this is called the mercy seat. This is where Yahweh will sit. And so that kind of brings us up to the present. And one of the things that we touched on is that when Moses goes up on the mountain, he goes up there for 6 days, and he got to witness the 6-day creation. He goes up in the cloud and basically looks backward in time to when the earth is created, and then immediately comes back and says, okay, I've seen this, great deed that Yahweh did. Now let me tell you about how to build this temple. You read between the lines, and what's going on here is that the temple is meant to represent the creation. And so you start all the way back with the heavenly things that are being created. And among them is like the great lampstand. And this is the lights in the sky, that aren't given names because, these are like sun and moon gods and stuff. Well, this is why the menorah is in that half of the temple. It's up in the heavens. And then you have this big veil that gets put up. This is the firmament that separates heaven and earth. And then you get all the earthly stuff on the other side of the temple. And so that's why the 6-day creation, that's why Moses goes up on the mountain for this period of time and then comes down and starts talking about the creation of the temple. It's because it's supposed to mirror the creation of the universe. And after that, it's just a whole bunch of tedious details about all the stuff that goes in the temple itself. This little table where you burn incense, and this altar where you perform these gruesome sacrifices, and all these different things. And so that's what we're going into now. And they really like their detail, like a lot. Like,
oh man,
half of the story of Exodus is just blueprints for making this ginormous tent. They're like, look, we need this tent. It's going to be 150 feet long. And we're going to talk about every square inch of the damn thing. And so, that's what we're in now.
Oh man. Okay. All right. Well, I'm ready to jump into this. We just got a super chat this early in the game. Thank you, Muttley. Muttley says, I had the most wonderful video chat with a friend from school yesterday. Hadn't spoke face-to-face since school back in 98. We shared our journeys to atheism. He watched some clip I shared. Okay, so it cuts off right there. But that's awesome. Thank you for that, Muttley. And that's always cool to reconnect with somebody, and then you find out that there was something that you shared that in common in that journey. A very interesting story that I shared while I'm getting our scriptures pulled up for this evening. I feel like I'm back in church now for sure. But while I'm getting my screen ready, an interesting story I shared this past Sunday is before we went into Sunday sessions, I had a friend from high school reach out to me on Facebook because they've recently seen that my content obviously leans towards the atheist persuasion. And so they're trying to figure out, like, bruh, what happened? Like, how? Because her comment was, okay, like when you were in high school, you were like on fire for the Lord. Like you were, like I led revivals at my high school. That was the type of on fire I was. And she's like, now I see you in these videos and you're like cussing people the fuck out and calling people stupid and shit. And she's like, I don't know what happened. And so, like, immediately when she mentioned this to me, I had this thought. There's a movie called Euro Trip, came out several years ago. Anybody that you saw it, one of the most popular songs that came out of that movie was Scotty Doesn't Know. Scotty doesn't know that Fiona and me does it in my band every Sunday. Says she's in church, but she doesn't go. But she's on her knees, and Scotty doesn't know. And it's Matt Damon playing that part. I don't know if he's the one singing it, but he's playing it. But anyway, Scotty at one point in the movie tells this story about him getting ready to watch some good old fashioned guy on gal porn. And he has all of his stuff ready. He has his napkins, his lotion. He's fully invested. He's fully ready for this moment. And he's watching, and he's like 45 minutes in, fully invested. And he realized that the girls never show up. And he's like having this mental crisis because he's just sat there this whole time for 45 minutes engaging in this, and the girls never showed up. It was just guy on guy action. And I told her, I said, that was my experience with Christianity. I had everything that I needed. I was fully ready. I had my lotion. I had my napkins. I was ready to be fully engaged. And I was in it for this long time, and God just never showed up. And so I loved it because she laughed her ass off because she was like, I'd never heard anybody put it that way before. But I loved it. Oh, man. All right. So we are jumping into the book of Exodus tonight, chapter 27. That means we've got 26 chapters down. So let's see what we're picking up on here. It says, let me get my reading voice. You shall make the altar of acacia wood 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Every time I see acacia, I think Anne Rice. You're going to have to forgive me for that. But 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar shall be square, and it shall be 3 cubits high. You shall make horns for it on its 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze. You shall make pots for its ashes, and shovels, and basins, and forks, and fire pans. You shall make all its utensils of bronze. You shall also make for it a grating, a network of bronze, and on the net you shall make 4 bronze rings at its 4 corners. You shall set it under the ledge of the altar so that the net shall extend halfway down the altar. You shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze as well. The poles shall be put through the rings so that the poles shall be on the 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. You shall make it hollow with boards. They shall be made just as you were shown on the mountain. You shall make the court of the tabernacle. On the south side of the court the court shall have hangings of fine twisted linen, 100 cubits long for that side. Its 20 pillars and their 20 bases shall be of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their bands shall be of silver. Likewise, for its length on the north side, there shall be hangings 100 cubits long, their pillars 20 and their bases 20 of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their bands shall be of silver. For the width of the court on the west side, there shall be 50 cubits of hangings with 10 pillars and 10 bases. The width of the court on the front to the east shall be 50 cubits. There shall be 15 cubits of hanging on one side with 3 pillars and 3 bases. There shall be 15 cubits of hanging on the other side, also with 3 pillars and 3 bases. For the gate of the court, there shall be a screen 20 cubits long of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen, embroidered with needlework. It shall have 4 pillars, and with them 4 bases. All the pillars around the court shall be banded with silver. Their hooks shall be of silver, and their bases of bronze. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, the width 50, and the height 5 cubits, with hangings of fine linen twisted and bases of bronze. Okay. All the utensils of the tabernacle for every use, and all its pegs, and all the pegs of the court shall be of bronze. You shall further command the Israelites to bring you pure oil of beaten olives for the light, so that a lamp may be set up to burn continually. In the tent of meeting, outside the curtain that is before the covenant, Aaron and his son shall tend it from evening to morning before the Lord, and it shall be a perpetual ordinance to be observed throughout their generations by the Israelites. Now, the first thing I want to say here, as this wraps up, is this is why Diddy had all of the baby oil. It's because of Exodus. It's this 20th verse. He said he told them to bring the pure oil. That's all Diddy was trying to do with the baby oil. All right, tell us what's going on here, Jason.
All right, so this gets into their whole thing. They've got to have all these different details. And again, this is not something that's written by some Bedouin tribe so they can carry all of this crap around. That never happened. This is written after the Babylonian exile. This is written for a people who have a permanent structure set up. And they're basically saying, this is how we do things. And this is why we do the thing we currently do,
Yeah.
because we have this text that, from 1,000 years ago that told us to do it this way. But don't touch it because the ink is still wet. So that's what they're doing here, is they're setting up an ancient pedigree for why they do certain things. Now the altar. So they've got this altar of burnt offering. This is to mirror the altar of incense that's in the other half of the temple, the heavenly half. And so here you have the altar of burnt offering. And this is where you take like all the dead animals and you cook them. Because, in Genesis, after Noah's flood, Noah went and he exterminated whole species so that he could send up this pleasing aroma to Yahweh. And Yahweh is like, man, I really want me some barbecue. And that's when he said, okay, look, everyone was vegan before, but now we totally eating some meat. This stuff is lit. Okay. As soon as he understood what barbecue was, the gods all got on board with it. Okay. And so this is what this is. Okay. It's, you have the incense, which is this, heavenly pure, producer of smoke. And then now you have the earthly thing. You have the plants and the animals, and they're going to get burned, and they're going to turn into this pleasing aroma that also wafts up to the gods. So you have the heavenly thing, and now you have the earthly counterpart. Because remember, the things on earth are meant to be a sort of shadow of the things that go on up in heaven. And that's why words that they use when they're talking about things are reminiscent of that. Humans are made to be an idol in the image of God. And they talk about how humans are a sort of shadow of the gods. Basically, we're shadow puppets, okay?
Yeah.
We mirror the things of the gods and the angels and stuff up in the sky. And that's why the temple is in one way, it's meant to be the palace of Yahweh. It's also meant to be representative of the creation. So that's what we're seeing here, and then there's this platform around the altar that's about the same height, and that's so that when the priest is up there and he's carving up these animals and setting them on fire and doing this whole thing, he's elevated. He's up above everyone else. So anyone who's in there, all the temple servants and the Levites and all that, they can look up and see this person up on this raised platform. And then they start talking about the court of the tabernacle. So basically what we have is we have two different sections here. The whole structure is 100 cubits by 50 cubits, and it's made of two equal-sized tents with an opening between them that's sealed off with a veil.
Yeah.
The one on the west is the one that represents heaven, and the one to the east represents earth. And all this stuff, the altar of burnt offerings and stuff like that, this is all in the earthly side, the eastern half. A cubit is about 18 inches or a little less than half a meter for all the people with those strange, metric measurements. I don't know what that's all about. I know what a foot is. I've got a pair of them, but I've never seen a wild meter running around, so I don't know what that is. And then we have this temple curtain that divides the two halves, and it has these stripes on it. Now elsewhere, we're going to see that the wall of the temple that goes around the entire perimeter. Later on, it's going to tell us that there are cherubim embroidered on it.
Ooh.
And people think, it's the fat little babies with the diapers and the wings. It's
no.
Cupid. No, these are monsters. Okay.
Yep.
They have 4 wings. Two of the wings cover their bodies. The other 2 are used for flying. They have hooves instead of feet, and they have 4 faces. 1 head, 4 faces. There's a human face, I think a lion faces to the right, an ox faces to the left, and an eagle to the rear. So this is a pretty jacked up looking critter, okay? And this is what's on the Ark of the Covenant, the Indiana Jones box that melts all the Nazi faces. There's a pair of them on there, and they lean over the thing and their wings cover the top of it to sort of protect the home of Yahweh.
Yeah.
And there's more of these monsters embroidered on the outside of the tent. Now, this tent never existed, okay? What they're talking about here is the second temple.
Yeah.
And these things are painted on the walls of the thing, similar to the way the Lamassu is painted on the walls of temples and palaces in Babylon.
Yeah.
It's these protective monsters that guard sacred spaces. And so that's what we have here. It's these Jewish monsters that guard things. Later on, in the Christian period, they're going to start cleaning up the heavens, and they're going to say, well, we've got all these monsters. Okay, we've got the cherubim, we've got the Ophanim, we've got a lot of these critters, and we don't want there to be a bunch of monsters running around in heaven, so we're going to say they're all angels. And so the seraphim, the cherubim, and the Ophanim are the big wheels within wheels. It looks like
the wheel within a wheel.
Yeah, it looks like the gravity drive from Event Horizon, and it's covered in eyes.
Yes.
These things are not angels. They are never anywhere in the Bible said to be angels.
Wow.
These are heavenly monsters. Later, they will be turned into angels whenever the Jews and the Christians want to clean up the heavens. But at this point, they're these weird heavenly servants, okay?
Wow.
And then, of course, everything that they have in here is all covered. It's all plated in bronze, or it's made purely of bronze. Look, migratory people who lived in tents did not carry around, thousands of pounds of metal just for the hell of it. They didn't do that, okay? That's not a thing. You don't start accumulating vast wealth and pointless decorative objects unless you have a permanent place to put them. And in the first temple period, in the days prior to the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel, the people in the southern kingdom of Judah, they were like dirt poor. These people lived in communities that were like, we're talking very small settlements, a dozen or so families. Some of the larger ones maybe had a few hundred or maybe 1,000 people. Any one of the northern tribes could have come down and conquered Judah without breaking stride. They didn't, because Judah was just this barren hill country and wasn't worth their time. Okay. They didn't have all this stuff. They didn't have this vast wealth. Okay.
Yeah.
They didn't start getting this stuff until the Assyrians conquered the northern tribes, and a lot of those people fled south into Judah, and the population quadrupled overnight. That's when Judah started to become important, when Israel had been conquered. And then not long after that, Judah became conquered by Babylon, and all the wealth that they accumulated that was brought south by the northern tribes, the Babylonians took it all. But even then, they didn't have this stuff, okay? This is much later. And then, of course, they're using the absolute finest oils and stuff.
Yes.
The Bedouins weren't like, you know what? I've got this olive oil here. I had to go to grow all these olives, and where would they get it?
Right.
Do you have any idea how long it takes for an olive tree to start producing enough olives to do anything with?
Oh,
It takes
man.
a while.
Come on now. Yeah.
You're talking a smooth decade before you're even going to start getting anything off of it, okay?
Man.
And even longer before you're going to have this thriving orchard. No. Bedouins didn't have this. They would have to purchase it from other people, okay? And if they had any olive oil, they weren't going to say, well, this olive oil isn't quite good enough to use. Let me just toss it out and
Yeah.
let me only
Yeah.
get the finest to burn. No, that's not how this works, okay? This is when you have an occupied, a permanently occupied settlement. You have buildings made of brick and stone and timber, and you have these orchards that are, a century old. That's when you're getting this stuff, not when
Yeah.
you're roaming the desert, okay?
Yep.
And you're not just like, hey, you know what? While we're sitting here, 2.5 million people at the base of a mountain, and there's thunder and lightning and earthquakes and fire and smoke, and our leader just kind of keeps going up there and vanishing for days and even a month on end. Let me just go raid some olive orchards and make the finest oils because this Aaron guy asked for it. No, that's not quite how any of this works. This is talking about a much later time in their history, and they're just setting it all, in the distant past,
Yeah.
which is what most of the Bible is. It's something that they're talking about in one time period, but they're pretending it's from a much later time or a much earlier time.
That tracks.
Or the term is retrojected. This is, these are much later writings that are retrojected into the distant past.
I like that. Yes.
So yeah, that's what we're looking at in chapter 27.
I love it. I know a few things here that just kind of stand out to me, especially as you started. You mentioned how because we're getting so much of the specifics of the temple design with the curtains, with the altar, with the incense, and you mentioned it, and I love the phraseology that you use, kind of shadow puppets. That these things are meant to kind of be a shadow of things. And I think that's a very important call out, just about religious literature and religious belief, period, is that it is very much our attempt to understand the world that we live in, at all times, even when we're using it for our own political advancement or social advancement. It is, in most cases, always an honest attempt to try to view the world and understand the world. And again, that's why I like the phraseology of shadows, because it takes me back to the allegory of the cave from Plato. And that very real instance that you're trying to interpret the world that is behind you. And I like that because basically you're bass backwards. You know what I'm saying? Like you're backwards and what you're seeing is only a shadow, but you're trying to build the world off of that shadow. But in this case, and this is one of those interestingly beautiful things about religion when you can get through all of the ugliness of it, is that apparently when it comes to these things, it seems that these groups of people are starting to already understand that what they're looking at is a shadow, and they're trying to understand what the shadow is, or what the object of the shadow is. And I think that's really good insight. I think that's something, because of the ugliness of the Bible, and because of the ugliness the ugliness that people have caused with the Bible, we're many times adverse to see the very real humanity that's present in its existence. And so I think that was an excellent call out there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, there's this late BC or early AD writing. It probably came about in the very early Christian period. It's called The Ascension of Isaiah. And in it, Isaiah, he's like talking to this king. They've got some questions and stuff. And he does this whole thing where he like flies up into heaven and he sees all of these, like he basically passes through all the different layers of the heavens. And he like gets to see like what's going on behind the curtain. And it's got this, there's like this whole weird thing. You really get to see their whole cosmology.
Wow.
And there's this scene where this Messianic figure, this angel, starts off up in the heavens, and he gradually like he starts off as like essentially he's like a deity, and he starts descending through all the different layers of the heavens until he gets down to the earthly realm, and so just below the firmament, and each time he passes down through one of the levels, he becomes less and less divine and more human.
Ooh.
And then once he gets down to the earthly level, he's then set upon by demons that live up in the sky. This is where they used to think that demons were, not underground. They thought they were flying around up in the sky. Okay, they're trying to get out of the firmament and get back up into the heavens. And so he gets down there, and they don't know who he is, and they attack him and they kill him. And he gets crucified up in the sky. Okay, and then after he gets crucified, he then begins, he descends into the underworld, and then after that, he triumphantly returns and begins putting on his divine flesh again as he reascends each level of the heavens. And each level, all 7 of them going all the way back up to the highest heaven. And that's when the demons realized they made a mistake. They accidentally killed this god, and now his blood is going to undo all of the corruption that they've done over the thousands of years that they've been here, flying around in the sky, ruining the creation. And it's this really interesting thing, but what's really cool about it is basically each layer of the heavens is a copy of the layer above it. And the highest heaven, where El Elyon sits, that's the true universe. And then as you go down through the layers, each one is just a copy of a copy of a copy. And so like the heaven is just above the firmament. It has almost like its own God that presides over it, but he's just this really dim copy of El Elyon, and the throne that he's supposed to occupy, like it's like much lesser than the real one. And then of course humans, we're just a copy of all of those angels and stuff that are up in the lowest heaven, what they call the first heaven. And so that's how the whole thing is. The real universe is all the way at the very, very top. And we're just the very bottom, like we're the copy of the copy of the copy. Okay. The most corrupt form there is.
There is. Wow.
And you also get to see a bit of that in the first book of Enoch. And both of those texts do a good job of painting a clear picture of their cosmology and how they thought everything worked, and how they thought people and angels and stuff were connected. And also that basically people were, in some respect, angels themselves. The Qumran community, these are the people who preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. They actually they thought that they were gradually becoming angels, and upon their death, their flesh would melt away, and they would become essentially, these lesser deities, and they would fly up into the heavens. And so they only dressed in pure white to represent their journey toward divinity. And like they had like this ritual bathing, like the amount of baths that were at Qumran. Most places, you would have like a limited amount of baths because, people just didn't bathe all that often. And so you didn't need a bath for every household. The amount of baths at Qumran, like Rome would be jealous of this. Like you almost had a bath per person. There was like 5 or 6 times as many baths per capita as anywhere else in the Eastern Mediterranean world. And it was because these people, they were constantly like ritually bathing to maintain this purity. Like the average citizen was obeying the strictest temple purity laws that the high priest would obey. It was very, very strange, but that was because they were trying to become angels, and that was how you do it, Dove soap, I guess,
Man. All right. Well, before we jump into 28, because this has actually become some really good conversation. That definitely triggers a lot of thoughts for me. I am working on another book. Now, this one is going to take me a while to write because this one I am trying to write with more of an academic focus. But it's called The Case for Religion. And in it, I'm exploring the sociological evolution of religion and how it came to be. And one of the central claims that I make in the book is that religion is the earliest form of primitive humanism. In that it's a sense of where it comes from a time where humanity doesn't trust itself to know what's best. And so it imagines a higher version of humanity. And that higher version of humanity is ultimately what we call divinity or deity. And then even what you're demonstrating here in these cosmologies, we've imagined that we were so far away from that higher version that we had to put in different layers. And again, but that shows you the detail of thought that's placed into that, because that's philosophical level of thinking where you're trying to wrestle with your metaphysical existence. And it's damn near honorable in this sense, because what they really kind of realize about themselves is like, we suck as a species, like we're horrible, we treat other people bad. There is a better way to be. We are not it. And so then we will imagine we will experiment with the imagination of what that could be. And ultimately that's how we get gods. But in that, even though our earliest forms of religion are not very humane, they have always been very humanistic in the sense that they are focused on what they interpret as the best good or the highest good for humanity. The concern always seems to be humanity as much, even though they kind of wrap it up in a microcosm of their own ethnocentric worldviews, which was to be given.
Yeah. To a large extent, cultures in general tend to be chasing an ideal, moving along a path of progression to become better.
Yes.
And, unfortunately, a lot of these ideas stick around far too long because of the very vehicle for that progression, the religion. And so we progress, but then we look back on it and it's still playing a role in our society.
Yeah.
And it's like, we've evolved beyond those people, and yet their ideals, their values are still here.
Yep.
And, of course we look at it in hindsight and it's like, oh my God, these people were horrible. What? They were for the most part, they were no worse than anyone else in the world.
Than anyone else. That's right. That's right.
Like we talk about how horrible the idea of slavery is in the Bible.
Yep.
And people are like trying to save the Bible from it. Oh, it was not really that bad and stuff like that. And it's like, look,
bruh,
at that time, everyone did this. This was the norm. Like, it was just a given. You just did it. Like, no one even, no one thought anything of it. And like, you even look at like slave rebellions, like that of Spartacus.
Yes.
He wasn't trying to end slavery.
Come on, man.
He was just trying to gain power and build his own army and, get himself out of it.
Yep.
And like, had he been victorious and carved out his own little, chunk of the Roman Empire and set up his own little culture, he would have he would have had a bunch of slaves.
That's how that goes.
Like, at no point was he like, slavery needs to end. That wasn't even a thought. No one cared about it. It was just a given. It was just
that's a contemporary evolution.
Did things.
Yes.
So yeah, and one day, 500 years from now, people are going to look back at us and be like, dude, those 21st century people were so horrible.
Yes.
Like, they're going to look at your most kind, generous, progressive humanist that you can find.
Yep.
And they're going to say, like, can you imagine being that wicked?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to exonerate the horrible people of the Bible.
No.
At the same time, when you look at them, you have to understand that you're judging people from 2,500 years ago based on
the standards
a
of
moral
today.
system that exists today,
Right.
and did not exist back then. You know,
That's right.
And in all fairness, could not exist.
No. That's right.
Like we live in a very comfortable society, and we're allowed to have these thoughts and these systems in place. It simply didn't exist back then. It could not exist back then.
Well, see, I mean, you said it perfect. It could not exist back then. That's one thing that I often remind people of, is that what we take for granted is how society has evolved. I often remind people that if you were born 15 to 20,000 years ago, you only had two occupational choices: hunter or gatherer.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And because we built society, your choices of identity has vastly expanded.
Yeah.
You know, like what you can choose to be. People 100,000 years ago could have never had that choice. But even being able to separate from our superstitions is a luxury. It's a luxury of having an established society. You don't have to run from lions. You don't have to chase your food. There's so much stuff that no longer preoccupies your time that you actually have the liberty, the luxury to explore and to think on things, you know.
And also in the ancient world, there was no such thing as religion. We
Say
see religion.
that!
Yeah. See, we see religion as this thing that is separate from daily life.
Man.
That is a very modern view once we started to separate these beliefs from the natural world.
That's so good.
When they saw a volcano, it was not, I have this religious belief that tells me there's a God in there. No.
Right.
There's a mountain and there's a pissed off God in there.
The mountain
He's
is
working
yelling
a forge
at me.
and throwing a tantrum. Okay. This was not, religion was not a separate thing from the rest of your life. You had your life. Man. And it was supernatural in nature. And that's just how it was. There was no such thing as religion. You know, that's a very modern viewpoint that really can only exist because we understand that religion is just a belief system founded out of a misunderstanding of nature. Wow. And until you have that, you don't really have religion. You just have how people understand nature.
That is so good. How did we get that much out of a boring ass chapter? Because that was like a boring ass chapter.
Know. I promise I didn't do it deliberately.
Right? That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Okay, so let me get us back on the screen here, and we'll make it through another chapter. And I will say, like, interestingly enough, most of the stuff about the designs of the temple did not interest me at all. But stuff about the vestments of the priest, for whatever reason, that shit appealed to me. You know, so like in the charismatic churches, we had all different types of vestments that we'd wear sometimes because we wanted to feel like Catholics at the end of the day. There became a move in the Protestant and many of the Protestant churches where they realized that one of the things they were robbed of in the Protestant movement is lineage and legacy. And so you start having churches trying to create their own type of lineage system by creating their own types of bishops, their own type of archbishops, which is so crazy because Protestants aren't even really created to be organized in this way. But they started having all of these types of things and to start wearing clergy collars and K-socks. It was insane, but I loved all of it because I like cosplay. And Catholics have some of the best cosplay in the world, man.
Oh yeah, all the different. I used to be an altar server, so I'm well aware of this, and like all the different types of vestments that the priests would wear, and which ones they wore for different times of the year and stuff like that, and the way the altar had certain things draped over it, and the different types of candle holders and everything. Like, yeah, the Catholics, they knock it out of the park. You know, like they put as much effort into that as they do instilling guilt. I mean, it is top notch.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, let's learn about where it likely comes from in chapter 28. So he says, then bring near to your brother, Aaron Hubbard, because I can't let that one go, and his sons with him from among the Israelites to serve me as priests. Aaron's Nadab and Abihu and Ithamar, you shall make sacred vestments for the glorious adornment of your brother Aaron. And you shall speak to all who are skillful, whom I have endowed with the skill, so that they may make Aaron's vestments to consecrate him for my priesthood. These are the vestments they shall make: a breastpiece, an ephod, a robe, a checkered tunic, a turban, and a sash. How did I miss turban before? When they make these sacred vestments for your brother and his sons to serve me as priests, they shall use gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine linen. They shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen, skillfully worked. It shall have 2 shoulder pieces attached to its edges, so that it may be joined together. The decorated band on it shall be of the same workmanship and materials of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen. You shall take the 2 onyx stones and engrave on them the names of the sons of Israel, 6 of their names on the one stone, and the names of the remaining 6 on the other stone, in the order of their birth. As a gem cutter engraves signets, so you shall engrave the 2 stones with the names of the sons of Israel. You shall mount them in settings of gold filigree. You shall set the 2 stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as stones of remembrance for the stones of Israel, and Aaron shall bear their names before the Lord on his 2 shoulders for remembrance. You shall make settings of gold filigree and 2 chains of pure gold, twisted like cords, and you shall attach the corded chains to the settings. You shall make a breastpiece of judgment in skilled work. You shall make it in the style of the ephod, of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen you shall make it. It shall be square and doubled, a span in length and a span in width. You shall set it in 4 rows of stone. A row of carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald shall be the first row, and the second row a turquoise, sapphire, and a moonstone. Oh, that's nice. And third row a jacinth, an agate, and an amethyst. And the 4th row a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. They shall be set in gold filigree. There shall be 12 stones with the names corresponding to the names of the sons of Israel. They shall be like signets, each engraved with its name for the 12 tribes. You shall make the breastplate chains of gold, of pure gold, twisted like cords. And you shall make for the breastplate piece 2 rings of gold, and put the 2 rings on the 2 edges of the breastpiece. You shall put the 2 cords of gold and the 2 rings at the edges of the breastpiece. The 2 ends of the cords you shall attach to the 2 settings, and so attach it in the front to the shoulder pieces of the ephod. You shall make 2 rings of gold and put them at the end of the breastpiece on its inside edge next to the ephod. You shall make 2 rings of gold to attach them in front to the lower part of the 2 shoulder pieces of the ephod, as is joining above the decorated band of the ephod. The breastpiece shall be bound by its rings to the rings of the ephod with a blue cord, so that it may lie on the decorated band of the ephod, so that the breastpiece shall not come loose from the ephod. So Aaron shall bear the names of the sons of Israel of the breastpiece of judgment on his heart when he goes into the holy place for a continual remembrance before the Lord. In the breastpiece of judgment you shall put the Urim and the Thummim, and they shall be on Aaron's heart when he goes in before the Lord. Thus he shall bear the judgment of the Israelites on his heart before the Lord continually. You shall make the robe of the ephod all blue. It shall have an opening for the head in the middle of it, with a woven binding around its edge like the opening in a garment, so that it may not be torn. On its lower hem you shall make pomegranates of blue and those other colors, with bells of gold between them all around. A golden bell and a pomegranate alternating all around the lower hem of the robe. Aaron shall wear it when he ministers, and its sound shall be heard when he goes into the holy place before the Lord, when he comes out, so that he may not die. You shall make a rosette of pure gold and engrave on it, like the engraving of a signet, holy to the Lord. You shall fasten it on the turban with a blue cord. It shall be on the front of the turban. It shall be on Aaron's forehead, and Aaron shall take on himself any guilt incurred in the holy offerings that the Israelites consecrate as their sacred donations. It shall always be on his forehead, in order that they may find favor before the Lord. You shall make the checkered tunic of fine linen, and you shall make a turban of fine linen, and you shall make a sash embroidered with needlework. For Aaron's son, you shall make tunic and sashes and headdresses, and you shall make them for their glorious adornment. You shall put them on your brother and on his sons with him, and you shall anoint them and ordain them and consecrate them so that they may serve me as priests. You shall make for them linen undergarments to cover their naked flesh. They shall reach from their hips to the thighs. Well, that's a little sexual. They shall be worn by Aaron and his sons when they go into the tent of meeting or when they come near the altar to minister in the holy place, so that they do not bring guilt on themselves and die. This shall be a perpetual ordinance for him and for his descendants after him. That was a lot of verses, and that was a whole lot of detail.
So the whole thing about the undergarments, this is where the Mormons get it. This is why they wear magic underwear.
This is the draw.
It's to protect them. And they have all these stories about how like this person was involved in this horrific car crash and the whole thing caught on fire and they were saved by their magic underwear. And Mitt Romney in some of the photos, like whenever he'd be at like debates and stuff like that and public appearances, like sometimes through the white shirt that his white dress shirt, sometimes you could actually see the magic underwear that he wore.
Wow.
It's basically just like this white sort of shirt and shorts, and it has like some little symbols embroidered in a couple spots with like white thread. It's very difficult to see, but yeah, Mitt Romney wears the magic underwear. Yeah. So that's where it comes from, that like second to last verse. So of course, like this whole thing is sort of like an ideological tale for the garments that these priests wear. So the Aaronite priesthood, they're all into their pageantry like the Catholics, and they've got very decorative garments that they wear, especially the high priest. And you can actually get on Google and do an image search of what this was supposed to look like, so it kind of clears it up. But they'd have like this giant like breastplate thing that they would wear with all these gemstones on it. Now, of course, in the photos or in the paintings and stuff, these things are like that big. No, they didn't have these gigantic gems, plucked straight out of the hoard of a dragon that they put on there. No, these things are probably like about this big, just mounted in there. And of course, they had 12 of them, one for each tribe, though this probably began as one for each sign of the zodiac, because they were all into their astrology.
That makes sense.
And they had been for quite some time. And of course, you can't have a religion that owes that much to Babylon without being heavily invested in astrology. There's actually, we actually have some old Jewish temples that have been unearthed that have all the different signs of the zodiac painted on the ceiling of the temple. And there's even one that has Moses riding in a thing that resembles like Zeus's chariot across the thing. It's like this flaming chariot with Moses riding in it, going across the ceiling, and there's like all the 12 signs of the zodiac put up there.
Wow.
So they really liked their astrology. And that's why the number 12 keeps popping up throughout the Hebrew Bible. Their whole prohibition against that's much later. But then, so in this chapter, in verse 3, it claims that the skill of the craftsmen who are doing all of this work comes directly from Yahweh. This is an idea that you have sort of approved divine knowledge and prohibited divine knowledge. And you'll see this like Solomon. He was blessed with all this divine wisdom. Yahweh gave this to him. But then you also have all these other people who got inappropriate knowledge. You see this a lot in the book of Enoch, but there's also hints of it in other things, like in Genesis, where it kind of goes through the whole genealogy of Cain.
Yeah.
And it talks about how some of his descendants, they were like metal workers, and they did things like that. This to show you, oh look, these people are evil, and they got this knowledge that was supposed to be forbidden. Humanity wasn't supposed to get it, but the fallen angels gave it to them. And you see this in, especially in Enoch, where it talks about, Azazel and his brood. They come down, and they're like, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna teach y'all like metalworking, how to make weapons, warfare, and then of course the most harmful of all, which was cosmetics." Like they're like, "Look, mascara." Into the world, okay? This is the worst thing you could possibly learn. And they teach them this, and then Yahweh pitches a fit because women are putting on makeup now. And maybe the men too. I don't know. I mean, Egypt, everyone wore it. So, but yeah, so they learn all this stuff, and this is knowledge that was not supposed to be granted. That's what Genesis 3 is all about. They go and they get the tree of knowledge, they eat the fruit, and they learn all of these different things, and they're not supposed to. Well, this right here in verse 3, this is Yahweh granting them approved knowledge. This is Yahweh saying, okay, these craftsmen, I'm going to make them better by giving some divine knowledge to them, and that'll make them good enough to make my temple and my priestly garments and my altar that's going to be soaked in blood and all sorts of things like that. So This means that their knowledge is it's coming from an approved source. Okay, and then of course you have the ideological tale for the breastplate and the temple vestments that the priests and especially the high priest will wear. And so basically this thing is almost like this golden apron that you wear over all of your other clothing. And you're supposed to have like the names of the 12 tribes embroidered on it with a gemstone for each one. Sort of like birthstones, oh, you were born in the month of June, you get such and such as your birthstone, It's basically like that. And then it says that this thing is called, they have this thing called the breastplate of decision, or the breastplate of judgment, and it has this pocket, sort of like the little pocket on the front of the little overalls that your kid has with Oshkosh on it, and he's got the little pocket in the front, and if you reach inside, you're probably going to find a toad. Well, this one it had the Urim and Thummim, which they were used for bringing judgments. So you're sitting there, you're presiding over a court case. You've got some kind of difficult decision to make, and it's not so clear-cut as you might hope. It's not a matter of, oh, this guy is clearly in the wrong. Okay, he's got to pay the fine. No, it's really tough, and you really don't know which way to judge. What do? You ask Yahweh for help. And how do you do it? You reach into the pocket of your magical onesie. You reach into your Oshkosh Bagosh, breast pocket, and you pull out an Urim or a Thummim. It's these two identically sized rocks, and they're painted two different colors. It's probably one black and one white. You reach in, you pull one out, and you're like, oh, looks like you're guilty. You're going to the headsman. Or you pull out the other one. Oh, look, God has shown his favor. You're clearly innocent. It was a coin toss.
Wow.
These were divining stones. And this is a practice, like people have been doing this all over the world forever. You draw the short straw. That's all this is. And it's just a 50-50 chance. You don't know which way to go. You just ask Yahweh for help. You reach into your pocket. You pull out a stone that tells you which way to rule. And that was a legitimate ruling for him. It was just chance.
Wow.
So that's more than likely what the Urim and Thummim are. One black and one white stone used to determine a verdict. Let's see, what else? There was Oh, so the high priest, he wears this thing in
The bell, yes.
verse 36, and it has the name of Yahweh on it.
Oh,
Now, of
yeah, on
course,
his
they don't tell
forehead.
you what the name is. It just says it has the sacred name of Yahweh. Now, it's not Yahweh. Yahweh is just a word that means Lord. But there's something, that he wears this thing, and he typically wears this on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest carries the guilt of the world and brings all this, and then Yahweh goes and clears it all up, and the whole world gets to start fresh. As far as what the name is, of course, no one knows. The high priest was supposed to whisper it one time on the Day of Atonement, and wasn't supposed to say it any other time, not the true name. Like, you could say Yahweh in very controlled circumstances, but this secret name of Yahweh, you weren't supposed to reveal it. And so only the high priest was supposed to know it, and he would wear it like, on something on his forehead, and only when he was in this other part of the temple where, like, the general public couldn't see, and the Levites and stuff weren't allowed. Only those who were approved could go into the heavenly side, and he was the only one who could see it. And at this point, he's supposed to represent Yahweh himself. The priest is basically becoming Yahweh for a brief period. He's his avatar, so that he can go and conduct the ceremony. He's doing this as Yahweh. Of course, different people have their own ideas of what the sacred name of Yahweh might have been, and there's a million different, theories out there, and unfortunately, we don't really have evidence for any of them. It may have just been, Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of the heavenly host, but I don't think so, because that wasn't a secret. Like, everyone knew that. That was all over the place. Like, it's on graffiti. Okay, I'm pretty sure that if it's just written out in public across 3 continents at this point, it probably wasn't much of a secret. Okay, so it had to be something else. As far as what that is, no, we'll probably never actually know. But unless we just happen to find one of these ancient things, from like 2,500 years ago that has it written on there. But yeah, we'll probably never know.
Very interesting. I know one of the things that really stuck out to me about this chapter, both before and even now, and became a major point of my early ministry, is the fact that the priest had to wear this bell in order to go into the Holy of Holies. And the ringing bell was the sign that he was still alive. And I guess this kind of tells you what type of churches I was a part of, because my mentors, they preach stuff like this. And it was just, this was the drive to be holy, to be pure. Because if you're going to be serving serving the Lord, if you're serving him unfit, serving him unqualified, uncalled, unrighteous, God could kill you at any time. And they'd often use this story. They use this chapter to really drive that point home, that God's holiness is so powerful that if you come in contact with it and you are unworthy, even if you're a priest, God will kill you. Which was very interesting. It's very interesting. Now, do we know if this bell situation has any roots in any other mythologies, any other religious or socio-cultural ideologies? Is this likely unique to them? Is this something they borrowed from somebody, or is this just creative literature thinking that, hey, if the bell stops ringing, likely he's not there anymore?
Yeah. As far as, did they get this from someone else? That's unknown. But there was an anthropologist who laid out some interesting information that was picked up by this one religious scholar who's a Methodist minister in the UK named Margaret Barker. And she believes that what was going on here is that this was almost like a lifeline for the high priest. So some scholars, there was at least one thing I read from another scholar that also picked this up. So we have at least a few different people who hold to this idea, or at least believe in the possibility that essentially when he went inside of the Holy of Holies, there was a great attempt to connect with their deity through a variety of means. You would have ritual fasting, so you would go a prolonged period without eating, and that would make any drugs that you ingested be,
more
potent. So
yes.
You would have that. In Ezekiel, he talks about fasting and then consuming large quantities of flowers. This is a region where poppies grow naturally. So if you're fasting and chowing down on a lot of poppy seeds, you're going to...
Oh, you about to have a good time.
Yeah. Or maybe a really bad time, especially when you have so much frankincense and cannabis smoke that asphyxiation becomes a possibility.
I'm about to roll up now.
But there's also things that indicate there may have been a lot of self-flagellation going on as well. Inflicting, the self-infliction of pain, self-mutilation in order to gain access to the spirit realm is ubiquitous. I mean, this went on everywhere, from, Peru, the Mayans in Mexico, you've got people in Siberia, everyone did stuff like this. Okay. This happened all over the place. And it looks like the Jews may have decided, you know what? We're going to starve ourselves, deprive ourselves of oxygen, inhale all sorts of smoke, chow down on poppy seeds, and strip the flesh right off our bodies all at once.
Wow.
I mean, this was a blood cult. Why not? And this dude is representing Yahweh. He on the Day of Atonement, he's meant to represent Yahweh. And you have to remember that the goat that was meant to represent Yahweh was brutally butchered and had his blood spattered all over the temple.
Yes.
In order to purify the world. And Yahweh used to be a dying and rising God. This is why the earthly incarnation of Yahweh, many generations later, would suffer brutally up on a cross in front of a whole group of people. Okay, the story of Yahweh is retold in the story of Jesus. He is meant to suffer like this, okay? This is how he defeats the great chaos monsters, okay?
Wow.
Most of the gods who defeated the chaos monsters died in the process and were then resurrected, okay? So this high priest likely passed out from the severe trauma. And then they would have to, when they hear all the bells that he's wearing on his body suddenly clatter to the ground, they're like, we need to get him. And then they would drag his near lifeless form out and resuscitate the dude. And miraculously, the priest has resurrected.
Wow.
Of course, this stuff gradually gets written out. It gets replaced. Just how, Yahweh no longer demands child sacrifice. These things gradually go away as their temple practices change and they stop copying these verses. And also, these things were meant to be done in secret. And so while you have certain things that explain your practices, other things no one gets to know because it's withheld. It's part of these, secret rites that they conduct. And so there is a non-zero chance that the high priest wore bells in order to save his life when he passed out from shock, blood loss, just trauma, oxygen deprivation, ODing on, the poppies and the cannabis and the ergot. I mean, all sorts of things were going on, and possibly at the same time.
Yeah.
It's very possible that high priests lived short and traumatic lives. Like, you became a high priest, and you may only have a few years before you go into the Holy of Holies and never come out again. That's why it says that even some of the high priests who go in there who are holy still die.
Man.
Because they probably did.
Yep.
And not because Yahweh killed them, but because they were chasing a vision through the most extreme means possible. And when the other priests pulled them out after hearing all their bells clatter to the ground, they were like, yeah, this dude's done. And then they had to go and consecrate a new high priest.
Man.
And I guess Yahweh didn't find him worthy. So that may be what we're looking at here, is these people were engaging in severely traumatic rites that killed them.
Okay, so something you just said, and I'm like, man, I don't know how we're pulling all this gold tonight. But I talked through this a little bit in my book, Christ Held Up, but I always struggled as a believer with seeing Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. Seeing him as a Christian Christ, I had no problem with, right? If his story starts with the Gospels and he is a new revelation, I have no problem with Jesus as a Christian Christ. But trying to make that connection of a Jewish Messiah, it always fell short, especially when I would give preference to a Judaic understanding of the Old Testament, which you likely should do when you're trying to understand a Jewish Messiah. But something you just said just made a light bulb click, and that is Jesus' character fails as a Jewish Messiah, and in every way around, every way that you can make that try to fit, the character of Jesus does not fit the profile of a Jewish Messiah. It just doesn't work. But Jesus as Yahweh is an entirely different story. When you view Jesus as Yahweh, not the Jewish Messiah, but literally this pre-Israelite deity, then his story does find connection in the Old Testament. That makes more sense of Jesus as God, not necessarily the Son of God. But Jesus as Yahweh makes more sense than Jesus as the Son of God. It makes more sense than Jesus as the Messiah. But Jesus as literally Yahweh, because then that's what brings in that his role as the sacrificial lamb. And of course, we know John, that's how John the Baptist introduces him. Behold the lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world, or behold the lamb who comes to take away the sins of the world. This is that Yahweh rising and dying God. So that was a beautiful connection. Finding Jesus as a Messiah, I couldn't do that. I could not quantify Jesus as a Jewish Messiah, or as a Messiah that any group of people who were attached to the Israelite faith would have been looking for, who died, right, and rose again. That was not a part of their ideology for a Messiah, but it was a part of their ideology for Yahweh himself.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now there's two things here. So one, you say it doesn't quite work as the Son of God, but it does work if he's there to be a God.
Yes.
Unless you understand that the earliest Christians were not monotheistic.
Yes, sir.
Go back and read the Gospel of Mark when he confronts the demon, and the demon recognizes him and says, you are the Son of the Most High. What's the Jewish name for Most High? El Elyon.
Yes, sir.
He recognizes him as Yahweh, the son of El Elyon, the God Most High. They were not monotheistic originally. And that is why the early Christians, or one of the reasons why they were such at odds with Second Temple Judaism. The Jews by this point had become monotheistic. This other branch of Jews, or branches, I don't believe Christianity came from one branch of Judaism. I believe it was an amalgamation of multiple, primarily the Essenes and the Ebionites. They were not true monotheists. They saw Yahweh as completely separate from El Elyon. A lot of their texts that talk about their God, they speak about him. Because by this point, there's, the Old Testament is saying, Yahweh and El are one thing, and it's just going by different names. Your ancestors didn't know me by this name. They knew me by this other name, all that. But these other, they reference, like, the book of Enoch is referenced more times in the New Testament than any single book from the Old Testament, including Isaiah, which is referenced more than any two books of the Old Testament combined. First Enoch is referenced more. And in First Enoch, El Elyon and Yahweh are two distinct creatures. Yahweh is the great angel. He's the son of El Elyon, who is meant to become incarnate in humanity in order to restore creation to its pre-Nephilim corruption.
Wow.
And that's why people have such a hard time matching the New Testament with the Old. There's so many things in there that just don't quite match up.
Man.
That's because Christianity, there was big sections of the Old Testament that just weren't that important because they had other things that superseded it. To some of these Jews, Enoch was a new Torah that superseded Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Yeah, those things were important. That's where you get your cool law code. But come on, who was cooler? Moses, who was, like he kind of glowed a little bit and was rejected by Yahweh and couldn't even go into the promised land?
Promised land? Yes, sir.
And died up on a mountain? Or Enoch, who turned into a fucking angel, lit on fire, and flew up into heaven bodily to escape death. The promised land? No, the dude went to heaven. He just walked on up there.
That's right.
Yeah, and Enoch is set up in 5 separate books to replace the Torah. So that's one thing.
Wow.
They understood Jesus as a God, but also as the Son of God, because they were two different gods.
Man.
And their Holy Spirit was the spirit of wisdom, the reimagining of the goddess Asherah.
Yes.
Who became incarnate in Mary. And so Mary was, Mary conceived Jesus through El Elyon, and the earliest Christians, people now say, conceived through the Holy Spirit. We actually have a Christian writing that says, those who say Mary conceived through the Holy Spirit are in error, because when has a woman conceived by another woman?
Wow.
So they're saying that the Holy Spirit is female and was not the father of Jesus. El Elyon impregnated Mary, so she, Asherah, could give birth to Yahweh, Jesus. And now the Trinity starts to make sense.
Yep.
The Father, the Son, and the Mother.
That's right.
And the other thing is, you have trouble envisioning Jesus as a Messiah because, again, it doesn't really fit the Old Testament, right? And according to Isaiah, I think in chapter 45, the Messiah already came.
Yes.
It was this dude who worshipped Ahura Mazda. It was Cyrus the Great.
Cyrus the Great. Persian. Yes, that's right.
But when you start looking at the intertestamental material, including Enoch, and they start talking about these other messiahs, there's this one section, it's called the Animal Apocalypse. best name for a metal album ever.
I love that.
And in this, they talk about this Messiah, and this guy, he comes from among the Jews, and he goes in, he purges the temple, he leads this whole rebellion, he kicks out the blasphemers, he tears down part of the temple, and he rebuilds it anew. And then he's betrayed by his own people, but he will come again in the future. And it's this messianic figure, and it's talking about this guy named Judas Maccabeus, who did all these things,
yes.
and he established this, like he reestablished the divine priesthood and all this other stuff. But then he died, and also it was around this time under John Hyrcanus that Judah annexed the northern kingdom of Israel. And this is the first time in history that the northern kingdom was ruled from Jerusalem. Okay, so that's when it actually happened, was around like 160 BC.
Wow.
Anyway, they were these Messianic Jews who were separate from the temple were looking for these things to happen again. They wanted it. They wanted Judas Maccabeus or someone like him to come back and do this thing again. And they were hoping it would happen soon.
Yeah.
And so there were people outside of the temple, people like those who lived in Qumran, who had a very different idea of what a Messiah would be. And someone who's betrayed by his own people and brutally murdered
Come on,
fit
sir.
the profile.
Come on, sir.
Not only would they have accepted that, they literally talked about it 200 years earlier and said it would happen again, which is why that particular passage would later be used by Christians as a prophecy for Jesus. But it wasn't a prophecy of what was going to happen. It was inspiration for writing the story that was used in the Gospels.
Wow.
They drew upon this and used it to create the story of Jesus.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you
So,
for that, man.
That he does make sense as a Messiah, and he does make sense as a son of God if you understand the views of the sectarian Jew, or at least some sectarian Jews at the time. And that requires reading a bunch of books that didn't end up in the Bible, or
That
didn't
makes
end up
sense.
in your copy of the Bible. But the Ethiopians kept them.
Oh, I love the Ethiopians. That Coptic church is something serious. And just a little fun fact for those of you who may not know, that the very word Coptic, when you're dealing with the Coptic church, the word Coptic, it actually comes from an old word that actually means Egyptian. It's a very interesting thing. And as a matter of fact, I want to say prior to, I may have my dates a little mixed up, but prior to, I want to say it's the 30s, 1930s, Egyptian culture was primarily Coptic, which is a very interesting time period. And I will admit I may have my dates a little confused. But the version of Egypt that we have today is not the version of Egypt that has existed for an extensive period of time historically. And as of now, the Ethiopian church is, as far as the Ethiopian, I'll call it Orthodox. They don't call themselves Orthodox, but they are considered Orthodox. But the Ethiopian church is probably one of the oldest relics that has some of those ancient Egyptian cultures that exist during those Middle Age periods. It's very fascinating. Finding out about the Ethiopian church as well as the Greek Orthodox church was highly fascinating for me and insightful about much of the world. You know, I always assumed that the Catholic Church was the only Orthodox church, and that there was no, I had never studied the other schisms. I didn't know about the split between the East and the West. And literally the Ethiopian church, I didn't know about it at all until the past 10 years. But was fascinated. They've preserved quite a bit of history, but in the same way that the Catholic Church has as well. They've preserved quite a bit of history as well.
Yeah, there was this I believe it was in 1769, a guy named James Bruce. He was this Scottish explorer. He was looking for the headwaters of the Nile. And instead of starting in Egypt and paddling upstream and, facing hippos and crocodiles and harsh desert and everything else, he decided to cut across Ethiopia because it's much more lush and green. It's more fertile and forgiving. And he could bypass hundreds and hundreds of miles of harsh terrain by going that route. And so he lands in Ethiopia. He starts marching across the country and encounters a bunch of Christians and had no idea how this country became Christian because the nearest Christians were in northern Egypt. And he's like, how did this happen? And then he started looking at their Bibles and realized they had a bunch of books that no one in the world outside of Ethiopia had ever heard of before. Wow. And so they bought some of these books, they copied a bunch of these books, and they sent them back to Europe, where they just kind of sat for, it was like 60 or 90 years, or no, I think it was over a century, where they kind of just did nothing. And then this dude, Robert Henry Charles, came in, I believe in the late 1800s, and translated Enoch for the first time. And within about 50 years, it kind of turned biblical studies on its head, because suddenly the gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and how you get this massive shift in belief systems and all the contradictions that arise when you try to match up, Second Temple Judaism with early Christianity, it suddenly started to make sense. There was an entire link in the chain that had been lost for nearly 2,000 years. And this, and what was weird was Europe was just completely in the dark. Meanwhile, these people in Ethiopia, they had it all along. It was just part of their daily life. It was part of church service.
Yes.
They had no problem. There was nothing to reconcile.
Wow.
They had the extra links. They had the steps, in the process. And it was just the rest of the world had no clue, because we stopped copying that book in the early Christian period.
Wow.
And these other people, they just had it the whole time. But yeah, so it's really cool. I did a 7-part series all about the book of Enoch, and went this in depth on the whole thing.
Wow. Well, I want to say just a major shout out to you for sharing that information. I do tend to find that when it comes to talking about the Ethiopian church's contribution to the historical record, I tend to find quite a bit of aversion there. So I am incredibly grateful that you were willing to acknowledge that. And I don't even want to just say willing, that you've done your research, you've done your study, you've demonstrated yourself as a more than knowledgeable person since we've been in this. So I really want to appreciate that. And I have to make this racial, because it is for me. A lot of times Black contributions to anything get overlooked. They get undercut. They get treated as, well, this isn't as important. And so that's how the Ethiopian church has gotten treated in a lot of conversations. So it always just fills my heart with joy. And not just because this church has African roots, but it's because when it comes to Christian history, this church is a major blind spot for many scholars. And there's a lot of stuff there. Obviously, I have nothing invested in the religion itself, but there's a lot of stuff there. So I did want to just major shout out to you for that, man. I appreciate that to you, from you, one brother to another. I do.
Well, thank you. Yeah. There's a cool little tidbit in there. One of my recent episodes of the podcast where I cover the book of Daniel, there's a scene where Daniel gets in a fight with a dragon. And that scene from Daniel, it was lost in all of the Western copies of Daniel.
Wow.
But it comes to us from the Ethiopian church. Fragments of it have been found elsewhere, so we know that this existed before.
Wow.
Like the Ethiopians, they didn't invent this story and add it
Right.
in.
Right. Wow.
It existed. We have some fragments of it, I believe, in Greek.
Man.
But and this is over like in the Middle East. So
yeah,
it existed there. Like the Jews had this story in the Mediterranean world and they lost it.
Man.
And it was preserved primarily by the Ethiopian church. Like I said, they just had it all along. Yeah, so Daniel getting in a fight with a dragon. There's another scene in which the prophet Habakkuk gets like picked up by the hair and flown to Babylon to give his lunch to Daniel. That's included in that episode. That one we did have preserved elsewhere, and there were some Christians who had that copy. It actually got turned into a very famous pair of sculptures that I believe are in Rome. There's one where like this angel is like about to pick the dude up and he's like pointing, and then on the other side of this chapel is Daniel, with all these lions.
That's
but
amazing.
the Ethiopians, there was a lot of stuff that they preserved that would certainly have been lost, without this tedious copying of text, one word at a time.
Man. And it's funny because the Ethiopian element, and we got a super chat. I'm gonna get to it. I'm getting to you, John. I promise you. But the Ethiopian presence in the Bible is pretty damn consistent. We see it as early as Genesis. I don't remember if we come across it in Exodus at all, but I do know that we come across it quite consistently in David's and Solomon's lifetime. And then, of course, we also see it again just randomly in the not the Gospels, but the I want to say it's in the Book of Acts. Yeah, the Book of Acts, where Philip comes across an Ethiopian who is reading the scroll of Isaiah, and even in that story, Philip is kind of like how do you know what's going on here? And the I think it's like an Ethiopian chariot driver or something. And Philip ends up baptizing him there in the Acts story. So Ethiopia has had a very interesting presence in the Bible that I find worth exploring for sure.
Yeah. Well, it is in Exodus. Zipporah, Moses' wife.
Yes.
She's a Cushite.
Thank you.
That's Ethiopia.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, the names have changed a little bit over the millennia. But yeah, he took a wife from Ethiopia. So yeah, there's actually some stories of Moses where he spends some time. He like leaves and he goes south into Ethiopia for a while. Yeah. He becomes like a military leader. He's like a general or something, and then he comes back to Egypt. And that's where like he gets his wife.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember where those stories are found, but yeah, there's lost stories of Moses out there too, and I don't remember exactly where they come from.
Man, if you ever remember, please shoot that to me, because that is highly intriguing to me. I know because I went through a phase where I was definitely studying the Black presence, African presence in the Bible as much as I could. And that the one thing that stood with me from those studies was Zipporah, and it was primarily because of the act of circumcision. Mm-hmm. And circumcision as a practice among African tribes is very old. Even to this day, if you look on a map, and I don't know why this map exists, but there's a map where the majority of people who are circumcised are. And Africa is like lit up red because circumcision is such an old practice, even controversially so, because in Africa we didn't just practice male circumcision, but also female circumcision, which is a very big issue today. It's just like a yikes. But that was on a speculative side, obviously I have nothing scholastic to make that connection. But from a speculative side, I've always wondered, because we know that Abraham himself was initiated through Melchizedek. And then we do have this experience with Moses where he's, I don't want to say initiated, but he's introduced to several things through Zipporah and her father, even though some people suggest that Moses was married to different women and that Jethro is not the father of Zipporah. I don't know how they got there, but I've heard it. But if Jethro is the father of Zipporah, then we do get these interactions that are very interesting. Now, and again, I will admit that is very much speculative, but I do find it fascinating.
Yeah. Most people agree that the Israelites got their practice of circumcision from the Egyptians, who had been practicing it for,
That's right,
many, many centuries before. It was actually the story of the Garden of Eden has countless parallels that you can find from North Africa. Like the story of Anansi, the spider trickster god, and a lot of these stories there, you have the deities. They used to walk with people and everything was fine and lovely, and then one day the people, they did something wrong after getting some bad information from a trickster god, often involving procreation, and that angered the gods. So then the gods pulled themselves up into the sky and wouldn't talk to the people anymore, and they kicked the people out of this lush place, and now they had to work really hard tilling the dry soil to get their food. Sometimes they were also punished with pain in childbirth. It's like, you look at it, and there was a thing when I first launched the podcast, I had put a post up on Facebook, and it was like 6 or 7 different stories. And I just lay out the details, and I'm like, okay, which one is the Garden of Eden myth? And if you went through, you'd be like, I think it's all of them. And it was like, it's, they all looked very similar. And it's like, these are these ancient tribal stories from all across North Africa. And these things, these are cultures that were not influenced by Israel. They didn't know what a Jew was. They'd never heard of those people. These were their own stories. And it's like, these stories were common all over the area,
All over the area, that's right.
The Bible is a relative latecomer to this style of mythology.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's beautiful, man. And just for all of you who are watching and are listening, acknowledging African influence or presence in no way disregards Babylonian influence, Persian influence, because those are the realities. It's all together. The truth of the matter is the people group who ended up creating this literature or contributing to what became this literature are people who had one of the best seats in the world to some of the mightiest empires on the planet around that time, through conquering and things like that. So they got a great view of the Persian Empire. They got a great view of the Babylonian Empire. They got a great view of the Egyptian Empire. Why not take the best of everything you've gotten from those things and incorporate it into your own story? Because in a very real way, it is a part of your own story. And anybody in this country who is anybody in this country who is an immigrant understands that, period. That eventually your story becomes intertwined with all of the stories you've become intertwined with. And so that is fascinating. That is a human moment. We do have a super chat, and so I want to hit it. John, I hope you're still in the building. I apologize that I didn't get to it as quick. Tonight, Jason has been on one. I don't know what he's drinking over there, but it sparked something. But John says, what do you think? What do you think of the ideas of Exodus as a counter polemic to the ideas of Manetho and other critical views of the Israelites? Which I enjoy reading quite a bit of Manetho, though he is a very much controversial figure. Quite a few of things there that are questionable. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. One of the things I think he's referring to is this hypothesis that's laid out in a book called Berosus and Genesis, Manetho and Exodus. This comes from the researcher Russell Gamirkin. Don't bother trying to buy the book. It's quite expensive. It's one of these like scholarly press books that comes from like a university, limited run, hardcover. It's meant for university libraries, not for like mass market publication.
Yeah.
My copy was crowdfunded. It took I launched a GoFundMe thing, and then next thing I know, it was done. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm getting this book that I never would have bought for myself, which was amazing. It's like $250 or something like that. It's quite expensive. But in it, Russell Gamirkin, he lays out this idea that large sections or even the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, though in this work focuses mostly on the first two books of the Torah, that it was compiled and inspired by these works, by these Greek authors. And basically the Jews were like, hey, you know what, let's write our own story similar to what these guys are doing. And so they're looking at these things and they're like, hey, you know, let's write something similar to that. And he lays out a very compelling case that, and he has some later books that came out. One of them is about, I'm trying to remember the name of it. Anyway, you can look up his books on Amazon. Russell Gamirkin, Gmirkin. And he lays out a quite compelling case that the Old Testament was compiled in the mid-2nd century BCE. So we're talking like about 200 years before the Gospels were written is when the biblical stories were compiled. Now, of course, some of these stories are much older. I mean, like Exodus 15, you know, is many centuries older. But that doesn't mean that it was in the book of Exodus at that point, or that Exodus existed at that point. You know, you can take older things and put them into a newer work. And he lays out this very compelling case. Now, was it their intention to argue against the views laid out by Manetho? I don't know, but seeing the parallels between Manetho and the Old Testament and the complete lack of any Old Testament fragments prior to this time period in any language. Because, you know, around the time that he's saying that they were compiling this thing and writing it, it wasn't long after that these guys in Alexandria were translating all of this into Greek to make the Septuagint. Don't you think we would have had a translation of at least one of the books of the Hebrew Bible at some point? If these books had been written in, you know, 700 BCE, to 500 BCE, it should have happened. And yet, not a single fragment of a single Old Testament work appears anywhere. We don't start to see them until they start popping up, like our oldest fragments start popping up in the 2nd century BCE. That's when we start to see them. When they have this concerted effort to widely publish these things. Wow. And that's very problematic if you think these things are extremely old. So could it be? Possibly. Could the Old Testament only be about 2,200 years old. I'm not going to say that it is, but every generation, the accepted dating of the Old Testament keeps getting moved up. Used to, they were saying that most of this stuff was written prior to the Babylonian exile, and now Christian scholars are saying that the Old Testament is a product of the post-exilic period.
Oh.
That's bad. Christian scholars are saying that the Old Testament is only a few centuries older than the Gospels. And these are, some fairly conservative-minded people who they've got a dog in this race. And here we go. We've got scholars who were saying, 2,300 years old, 2,400 years old, max.
Wow.
And we've got Jewish scholars who are saying Persian period, maybe the Greek period. The Hebrew Bible could be a Hellenistic work.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why we believe it is. So, is it? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know. But if you read Russell Gamirkan's work and you read the work of people like the scholar Jacob L. Wright, who is a Christian who lives in Atlanta.
Yeah.
He's saying this thing is maybe only 500 years older than Christianity.
Yep.
He's a Christian. And then you look at others who have done research into this, like Thomas Brody, Thomas L. Thompson, some of these people who first looked at it and said, we don't think Moses existed, and were kind of, shunned by the community.
Yep.
There we go. Yeah.
You mentioned him.
Thomas L. Thompson, who I think was the guy who basically was like laughed out of academia for saying that Moses never existed. And then within a few decades, it just became the consensus.
Yes.
Moses was a mythical figure. The dude's career was ruined because of his thesis. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, sorry, bro.
Damn.
Yeah. He did find employment in Europe, but the dude could have been this groundbreaking scholar. Unfortunately, he was just about 30 years too early.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wonder, like, in 30 years' time, are we going to be looking at these books by Russell Gamirkan and being like, man, maybe we should have paid more attention?
Yes. Yes.
So, I definitely, like I said, I'm not a historian. I'm not smart enough to really put the screws to his arguments and see if they hold up. That is for people with a whole alphabet of credentials behind their name. That's for them to do. What I have noticed is that, like, I haven't seen any serious scholarly work that has been able to dismantle what he's put out.
Yeah.
And I have seen other researchers look at his stuff and say, this guy's got a point.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great material. I definitely recommend checking it out. Derek Lambert, my buddy over at Myth Vision.
Yes.
He has a lot of stuff where he takes a deep dive. He's interviewed Russell Gamirkan multiple times. Yeah. Check out his stuff. He can represent his case far more eloquently than I ever could. I've read his book, Berosus and Genesis, Manetho and Exodus. Amazing read. Like I said, quite compelling. I'm looking at getting a couple of his other more recent works to check those out. I have looked up some of his stuff concerning the story of Exodus, and I was like, oh, well, and also some stuff, I think with like the Tower of Babel and a few other things. And I thought, okay, yeah, this guy, he makes a pretty good point. And then I went and I looked at the source material myself. And instead of saying, oh, well, maybe Russell Gamirkan overstated his case, I thought, man, he could have actually stated this stronger because it looks even more damning than he portrayed.
Wow.
So very, very good stuff. I highly recommend his work. Like I said, affording it is going to be the problem because at least with this first book, like I said, it's about $250. But his later books, they have garnered more traction and are available to a broader audience. They're closer in line to like a mass market production and not these like university press sort of books. So yeah, definitely go and check that stuff out. Russell Gamirkan.
Man.
But yeah. I don't know if I'm qualified to make a judgment on John's question, but at the same time, I haven't been able to poke holes in the thing, and whenever I encounter an idea that's out there, that the first thing I do is I try to tear it down, to see if I can find some holes in it. Does this thing hold water? And my inability to find cracks in it doesn't mean that it's a good idea. It just means that I'm unable to.
That's good.
Can easily just speak to my own shortcomings.
Yes, sir.
But other people have taken a look at this, and I haven't heard any good refutation of his material. And this has been out for a while. I think this book came out like a decade ago.
Wow.
So, yeah, definitely check out his stuff. The Old Testament, like I said, stories in there are obviously much older.
Yeah.
But it being compiled may have only happened a couple centuries before Mark was written.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That was actually a major it was a major thing for me during my deconversion, actually. Was realizing that, again, like you said, the stories themselves may be as old can be. But once I realized that the compiling was relatively recent, especially in comparison to the New Testament, it was just like, well, damn, the Old Testament just got finished right before the New Testament started. And that like, it opened up a dam in my mind of things. Now, I cannot believe that, Jason, we've only made it through 2 chapters tonight, and we've been here for 2 hours. And these were not great chapters. Let's just be honest. That it's like as soon, because before the show, I was trying to figure out what chapters we were on, and when I was looking through them, I was like, holy shit, how are we going to pull a conversation out of this? And interestingly enough, we just took 2 of the most boring chapters in Exodus and pulled out some, what I think is highly valuable conversation. And so, in true fashion, what we kind of do, what we've been doing every night, I want to kind of let you close us out a little bit. But something I want you to do a little different tonight, a different request I want to make. You are incredibly well read, and you are incredibly efficient at finding resources and getting the gold out of those resources. So, one, I want to make a point. And the first point that I want to make is just to those of you who are watching and listening, is that media has shifted. So, there used to be a day where you had to read a book, and then there became a day where you could watch a movie, and then there became a day where you can listen to a book. And now there's a day where you can listen to or watch somebody on YouTube break down the parts of the book that matters something to you. And so for those of you who do not have the time and the bandwidth, Jason's channel, Dragons and Genesis, would be a great place for you to get some insight into that information. You get to be like a front row student and learn all you want to learn with no judgment, no condemnation, and you can kind of learn at your own pace. Because like Jason has called out plenty of times, a lot of this stuff has a very significant cost barrier. And he's crossing that barrier so you don't have to. But the request I want to put on you, Jason, is for those who are watching and listening who may have that bandwidth and who may have 99 problems and money money isn't one, or maybe they have a community that's willing to crowdsource them some information. Can you give them some advice? Because there's a lot of people who are highly interested in these types of books, whether it's Christian literature, Jewish literature, pre-Canaanitic literature, Ugaritic literature. There are people who have high levels of interest, and it's because of the work that you're doing and people like Derek Lambert that's even stoking that interest. So as we're closing up, and of course, always share where they can support you, what they should be excited about supporting. But share within that a little bit. Would you mind giving them a little bit of advice for those who are interested in being students of this, what they can do to posture themselves to get some good information?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would say is if this topic is something you want to take a deeper dive into, which, I mean, if you're here spending a couple hours a week listening to me, then you must have some interest. I would suggest starting by getting two things: a good student study Bible. I would, like the NRSV, and make sure it's an actual study Bible, because those are going to have like lots of footnotes that's going to explain a lot of different things. And it was reading one of those that actually started me down this path back when I was still Catholic. The second thing I would recommend is a good Bible commentary. One good one to start with would be the Erdman's commentary. It's going to be a little pricey, and it's pretty big. I mean, it's like that thick. It's a chunky boy. But Erdman's commentary is going to basically, each book of the Bible is outlined by a different scholar who is an expert in their field, and they do a deep dive into that particular book. They break down, the history behind it, the social implications. They talk about the different chapters, the formatting of it, the different source material. And reading a book like this alongside the actual source material, the Bible itself, is going to explain so much to you. You really can't understand the Bible by reading it. You can't, unless you have devoted your life to learning about this type of literature. You're not going to understand the Bible by reading it. Reading the Bible is useless if you don't have good material to explain to you what it is you're reading, because so many people read these things and what they take from it, what they think it says, is not at all what it says, because they just simply lack the information to understand these words. Because this was not written for you. This was written for people who lived in an entirely different world. So you really need a good commentary to understand the Bible. Another one would be, and this one will go deeper into the mythology behind these stories, though it's not as comprehensive. Like, there are certainly sections of the Bible that get skipped. And that's going to be the Holy Fables series, volumes 1, 2, and 3. And honestly, if you want to get a good grasp of the Bible, I would suggest buying the Holy Fables series and the Erdman's commentary. And so at this point, you'll have like 4 books plus whichever version of the Bible you pick up. And then read that. And that's going to give you a more complete picture of the Bible. And that's really where you kind of have to start, is with essentially a small library. And that's just to read the book to understand what it is you're reading. That's not even going down the rabbit holes. If you want to really start going down the rabbit holes, obviously my podcast would be a good place to start, because I'm already gathering up all the relevant, or not all, but a significant amount of relevant material just to lay out each episode. And I'll be suggesting books like Why the Bible Began from Jacob L. Wright, which you definitely want to read that if you want to understand the context of these writers. the world they lived in and why they were doing what they were doing. Another author that I would suggest would be Mark Smith. His work on the mythology behind these different stories is groundbreaking. So, that would definitely be another one to check out. And then I would also suggest checking out some different lecture series that you can find on Audible. If you don't already have an Audible subscription, you are missing out on one of the best things in the world. But head over to Audible and check out the great courses. There's a ton of material on there, okay? Professor Amy Jill Levine has this whole thing all about the Old Testament. I think it's just called like the Old Testament. The woman is a bona fide genius. And like my podcast would not be what it is without scholars like Amy Jill Levine. So definitely check out her stuff. My work on the Old Testament is literally made possible by a lecture series from Professor Amy Jill Levine, full stop. Okay. So you got to check out her lecture series on that. Amazing stuff in there. Listening to that and then reading the books that she's talking about, you'll have a whole new appreciation and understanding of them. And then, of course, there's a ton of other things. There's one called Understanding the Old Testament and another Understanding the New Testament. And then if you really want to go deep into the rabbit hole of some of these topics that we're talking about here, especially the whole First Temple, Second Temple, the weird practices they engaged in, and their thoughts on basically like apocalyptic Judaism and the whole end of the world and stuff like that. I would suggest grabbing the book Temple Theology by Margaret Barker. The whole thing about the blood cult and the dude like potentially passing out and having to be extracted from there. I believe that comes from like the last dozen pages of that book.
Wow.
Now this book is so dense. Like reading it is like reading a 300-page commentary on Exodus, but the book itself is like maybe a 1/4 inch thick. It's tiny.
Wow.
But whenever I was taking notes on it, I was finding myself copying entire paragraphs verbatim because there wasn't a single word I could leave out and still keep the meaning. You're going to find that Margaret Barker's writing is like that, and this is one of her lighter books.
Wow.
The Great Angel, A Study of Israel's Second God, and the Older Testament. Don't pick them up. Don't buy them. Don't read them. Not because they're bad. No, because have you ever started reading a book while you were half asleep and you were starting to doze off and you had to read the same paragraph 4 or 5 times before you actually understood it because your brain is just too tired? That's what it feels like reading those books while wide awake and fully caffeinated.
Wow.
I couldn't read more, in some cases, more than a single chapter before I'd have to take a break. Because if I read a second chapter, I would actually start to get headaches. I went through I'm not even exaggerating here. I went through a bottle of ibuprofen reading the Older Testament. I did a 4-part mini-series based on that book. It was some of the best episodes I've ever done. And you can ask my girlfriend. I was in actual physical pain trying to cram the information into my brain. I don't know. I've never experienced that while reading anything other than her work. It's extremely dense. So I would stay away from some of her thicker books. Pick up Temple Theology and The Lost Prophet. Dig into those. You'll have a blast. Stay away from the Older Testament and the Great Angel. You won't understand it, and it's going to cause pain. And I'm not exaggerating. She's one of these people that if she had turned her attention toward physics, we would be talking about her in the same context as Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking. But instead, she turned her attention toward theology. And she goes so deep into it that you basically need a degree to understand what she's talking about. I mean, there's parts of those books I don't understand. I have to go back and reread sections of those books because I just didn't know enough to grasp the words. It was like reading something written in another language. So, I see Adventure Chick in there crying about Margaret Barker. Yeah, she got headaches reading or trying to read a chapter of Margaret Barker because she didn't believe me when I said that. Yeah, so check out Biblical Theology and The Lost Prophet. You'll have a blast with them. They're amazing books. They're thin, they're quick reads, insanely dense.
Wow. Okay, Jason, you said something that as a former preacher has me tripping a little bit. And so I have to hit it. Like, I have to hit this. And then I'm going to let you finish. And I'll jump back off and let you finish. But I had to interrupt, and you gave me the perfect point to do so. And that is, you said, had she turned her attention to physics, she would have been, we'd be talking about her in the same circles of Einstein and Stephen Hawking's. But this is what she turned her attention to. And I wanted to call that out as a reminder to everybody, like that whatever it is that you're killing it at now, like, believe it or not, if you turn that attention to anywhere else, you'll be able to kill it in that same way. And that's something that Jason just highlighted. What he highlighted is that this person was so good at what they were doing. And once you realize how good somebody is at doing something and that they have a good understanding of it, you realize it's not even the thing that makes it. It's the fact that they're so attentive, you know. And so what I found is that for all of us, there's something that we're attentive to. And this is just from our Sunday sessions because we've been in these drive conversations. And a lot of times people think they don't have drive because they're not driven by things that other people are driven by. And that's what I think. That's what I think this was beautiful. So no, while she wasn't driven by physics, she was driven by this. And this has created a treasure trove of information for everybody else. And that's beautiful. And people seem to really identify with that. And I also wanted to interrupt because you got a super chat. And it was Dragons and Genesis podcast. Can you post a link in Darante's Discord of all these books? I'm struggling to keep up. Now, Jason, I won't force you to join my Discord, but if you do, then you can post the link. But I know you have a schedule, you have a life.
Yeah.
If you send me some of the links, I can post them in the Discord as well. So either way you want to make that work, we can work it.
Muttley, it's really easy. Go to dragonsandgenesis.com. I've got a list of recommended reading. Most of those books are already on there.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I'm pretty far behind on posting things on there. I really need to get on there and update the website, but there's a lot of those books already on there. Most of these things you can just find on Amazon, get them in paperback or on the Kindle, either one, your choice. So yeah. And if you want to get a taste of the kind of brilliance that this little old lady, and like, she looks like a little tiny Pentecostal grandmother who is going to bake some bomb-ass cookies, and go sell over at the church for whatever fundraiser they're doing that particular Wednesday. But this woman, like, I'm convinced that her brain is in a vat somewhere because there's no way it fits inside of her head. Wow. But if you want to get a taste of her brilliance, hop on YouTube, go to search History Valley. Jacob Berman interviewed her about a year ago. Just type History Valley Margaret Barker, and you'll find it. Amazing. Like, that woman opens her mouth, I turn up the volume and shut off everything else. Okay, the woman is brilliant. She's spoken multiple times at various things. I think the Mormons had her over to explain some stuff
Wow.
at a thing. Like they literally flew her from the UK to like Salt Lake City or something to give a talk. Okay, this lady is. Her brain is on another level. I'm not smart enough to read her work. So yeah, definitely check her stuff out. But yeah, just when it comes to any of these things like this, I try to distill this information to put on my show, or as I like to tell people, I read the boring stuff so you don't have to. But if you want to go straight to the source and you want to buy these books and build, a library that, might accidentally crush you if the bookshelf ever falls over, go to my website, and I keep a list of recommended reading. I'm going to try maybe this weekend to update that and, get about 24 more books put up on there. So yeah, definitely check that stuff out. You're going to have a lot of fun, reading some of these things, because as much as I try to fit into an episode, there's 100 times more that I have to cut out just for the sake of time. So yeah, if you want to read this stuff, yeah, definitely start there. A good commentary, a good study Bible, and some time.
Beautiful. Man, that was perfect. I am glad that I asked you that. I think everybody just got so many gold nuggets out of that. I see people taking notes. So this is incredible. Again, Jason, thank you for being with me another week. I can't believe we only got through 2 chapters, but I can't lie. This is likely going to be one of my favorite episodes that we've done. Like, I'm going to have to go back and watch this one again. Because I'm in awe that we pulled so much out of these 2 chapters. I mean, this may be the first night that we've actually went beyond 2 hours. So I'm ecstatic.
Well, I'm glad, because I felt like I kind of ruined the episode by derailing us so many times. It's like, yeah, we're gonna talk about his little chest pocket with his magic rocks in it. Yeah, let me just start talking about Enoch again.
Right.
That's relevant.
Everybody loves Enoch, though. That's like a buzzword. Awesome, man. Well, listen, I'm gonna drop you drop you backstage as I do my last rounds. Everybody say good night to Jason, and of course he'll be back next week where we'll be doing the same thing. Listen, thank you all for hanging out with us, man. These are absolutely amazing to me. Like, like, tonight's conversation was so rich. Am I tripping? Is it just me? I mean, y'all let me know in the chat. Is it just me, or was tonight's conversation like something different? It was so rich. I mean, only 2 chapters, and yet we've had over 2 hours of conversation. And we've talked about a little bit of everything. We've talked about priestly vestments. We've talked about presidents wearing magical drawers while they're doing speeches. We've talked about Black folk being more present in the Bible. We've talked about how to actually get our hands on materials to help us get a better understanding. These conversations are, to me, dynamic. They're needful, So it's just an incredible conversation. All right, so I'm wrapping up because I don't know if y'all know this, but like y'all kind of know, because I think I tell y'all at the beginning of the episode. Like, I clock out of work. I'm typically clocking out of work while I'm logging into StreamYard and letting Jason know I'll be there in just a moment. I'm trying to navigate, so it'd be hectic days. But Wednesdays and Sundays, interestingly enough, as an ex-pastor, has become 2 of my favorite days of the week, because I get to hang out with this great community, and I get to hang out with great people who share just some amazing content. One thing I do want to ask you all to do before you leave, and I'm going to share my screen, is that if you haven't already, tell us where you're from. Tell us where you're watching from. Try to give a city and state if you're in the US, and if you're abroad, province and whatever. I'm not going to pretend to know it. Don't trip me up like that. And as you can tell, I've been drinking and smoking a little bit, so I ain't got time for all that. But if you see this little dot on my map on my screen, this is where I am. I'm in Dothan, Alabama. And I've just been sharing content from Dothan. And this is how our community has grown over the past few months since I've been sharing content. And our biggest areas right now, Atlanta, Georgia. Oh, that's right around the corner from me. Charlotte is in the building. Jason, I don't think I knew you was in Charlotte. I knew you was in North Carolina. I don't think I knew you was in Charlotte. And I think not Seth Rogen. What's the other one? The guy from the Righteous Gemstones. Can't remember his name now, but he's in North Carolina too, I believe. Uh-oh, there's another person in Charlotte. What? And I was actually about to say that, like the North Carolina and Virginia areas, we seem to have a lot of people there. And then interestingly enough, California has been making a big bid. But not only that, let's spread this thing out a little bit. You can see we're in Canada, we're in Hawaii. We are killing it in Central America right now, and we are breaking into South America, which was a concern because I was wondering, Wisconsin in the building? I was wondering if we were ever going to get in South America, and we did. And then obviously, as a Black man, I am absolutely excited that we are breaking way into the motherland. Actually, a few weeks ago, we had somebody reach out and let us know that they was in Sierra Leone. And my great-great-great-great-grandmother is actually from Sierra Leone. So that was a tear moment for me. I was grateful for that. And then, of course, our European friends like Muttley, do you see this? We are all over Europe, man. It is beautiful. We even got somebody in Russia. I don't know how we did it, but we did it. And yes, we've got one in Ethiopia. We do. Our community has been growing, man. Like it's absolutely beautiful. And it is absolutely intentional. We're in Australia, we're in New Zealand, we're in the Philippines, we're in South Korea. I don't know why we're not in this area yet, but we're gonna work it. We're gonna work on that. Y'all can't see my mouse. Oh, yes, you can, but we're gonna work on it. So that's one of the things that I do try to ask in as many of our live shows as possible is where is it that you're watching from? Because we're trying to document it as much as we can. And then when we have people who fill out our forms on our Sunday sessions, we document that as well, so that as we see community hubs being built in certain places, we know we need to invest time, money, and resources there into creating tangible local communities. So every time you're letting us know where you're watching from, where you're at, you're letting us know that somebody else is in this area. And as soon as we can kind of hit some thresholds, we're coming. Because the whole idea is to build community, right? If you've been connected with this channel in any sense of the way, you know that that's what we're doing. Build progressive thinking, people-centric, life-affirming community, man. Healthy people, healthy relationships, healthy outcomes. We're trying to change the world, and that's what we're here from. Idaho, yes. Okay, now I feel like I just played a joke on myself. All right, so that's it. That's all I have for y'all tonight. Let me get this outro set up. Of course, if you're interested to see how many people go into helping this channel be what it is, make sure to stay to the very end so you can see the credits. And I think that's all I have for now. So listen. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. That's been playing the whole time. That's interesting. All right. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. And consider connecting, supporting, or joining this community channel or content in any way that makes sense for you. And check out the merch. It is dope. And we have books, man. Type in my name, type in my wife's name. You're going to find our books. Christ Held Up was my newest book until this week. Now my newest book is Black Non-Believer Next Door, an Ex-Pastor's Journey, Volume 1, where I'm talking about the first 2 years of my life after deconstructing. And I promise you, it is a must read. You can pre-order it now. All right, that's all I have, y'all. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful only if you can. I'll holler at you later.
was living my life in the servitude of misunderstandings of people I loved. Giving it all, it was never enough. Because of the fall, I could never get up. I moved on from their misunderstandings. I am no longer standing under them. I was drowning, now I swim. 'Cause I found the strength within. I don't need your absent friend. 'Cause I got this, yeah. 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 This is holy ground. Depraved and deprived, I was living your lies. Lost in a moment with truth sacrificed. Voices aplenty that never seen right.